The Caribbean sun blazed mercilessly over the deck of the Royal Empress, a massive cruise ship slicing through turquoise waters somewhere between Miami and Grand Cayman. It was August 14th, 2016, day 3 of what should have been a dream vacation for the Caldwell family. Jennifer Caldwell stood at the railing of Deck 9, her hand shielding her eyes as she scanned the crowds of tourists lounging by the main pool. Laughter and reggae music drifted through the humid air, mixing with the scent of coconut sunscreen and grilled burgers from the outdoor buffet. "Ethan," Jennifer called out, her voice almost lost in the chaos of vacationing families. "Ethan, honey, where are you?" Her 8-year-old son had been right beside her just 15 minutes ago, excitedly pointing at dolphins jumping in the ship's wake. She'd turned away for just a moment to order them both ice cream from a nearby stand, and when she looked back, Ethan was gone. At first, Jennifer assumed he'd wandered to the arcade or back to their cabin on Deck 6, but a quick check of both locations turned up nothing. Now, as she pushed through clusters of sunbathing passengers, a cold knot of fear began tightening in her chest. The Royal Empress was enormous, carrying over 3,000 passengers and 1,200 crew members, 14 decks of restaurants, theaters, shops, and endless corridors that all looked exactly the same. A child could get lost here in seconds. "Excuse me, have you seen a little boy? Brown hair, blue Pokemon shirt?" Jennifer asked an elderly couple sharing a towel. They shook their heads sympathetically. She asked again at the ice cream stand, at the pool bar, at the entrance to the kids' club. Nothing. No one had seen him. Jennifer's walk became a jog, then a run. She descended 2 flights of stairs to Deck 7, her sandals slapping against the polished floor as she raced toward guest services. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter, face flushed and voice cracking. "My son is missing," she gasped to the young woman behind the desk. "Ethan Caldwell, 8 years old, he was just with me on Deck 9 and now I can't find him anywhere. We need to search the ship right now." The clerk's professional smile faltered. "Ma'am, I'm sure he's just exploring. Children often—" "No!" Jennifer slammed her palm on the counter. "You don't understand. Ethan wouldn't wander off. He knows better. Something's wrong." The urgency in Jennifer's voice must have registered because within 2 minutes, a senior security officer named Miguel Santos appeared, radio in hand, his expression grave. He was a stocky man in his 40s with graying temples and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd handled crises before. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Santos said, guiding her to a private office behind guest services. "Start from the beginning. What time did you last see Ethan?" Jennifer fought to keep her voice steady as she explained. They'd been on the ship since August 12th. Everything had been perfect. Ethan was having the time of his life, swimming in the pools, eating unlimited ice cream, watching movies in their cabin at night. That morning, they'd attended a family breakfast in the main dining room, then spent the late morning at the pool. At approximately 1:15 p.m., Jennifer had stepped away to order ice cream. When she returned at 1:18 p.m., Ethan was gone. "He had his keycard with him," Jennifer added, pulling out her phone to show Santos a photo of Ethan grinning at the camera, his front teeth slightly crooked. "He knows our cabin number. He's been using the elevators by himself since yesterday. He's a smart kid, officer. He wouldn't just disappear." Santos studied the photo, then spoke into his radio with controlled urgency. "Code yellow, Deck 9 main pool area. Missing child, 8 years old, male, brown hair, blue shirt with yellow Pokemon character. All personnel initiate immediate search protocols." The response was instantaneous. Throughout the Royal Empress, crew members received the alert. Housekeepers paused their cleaning, waiters left their stations. Deck supervisors mobilized their teams. The ship's security department, a force of 20 trained officers, began coordinating a systematic sweep of every public area, starting with the most likely places: arcades, movie theaters, kids' zones, and outdoor decks. Jennifer wanted to search too, but Santos gently insisted she remain in guest services where she could be easily reached. "If Ethan finds his way to any crew member, this is the first place they'll bring him," he explained. But sitting still felt impossible. Every minute that passed was agony. At 1:45 p.m., Santos returned with an update. "We've checked all public areas on decks 5 through 10. The pools, restaurants, shops, theaters, nothing yet. We're expanding the search to lower decks and crew areas. We've also alerted the bridge. Captain Morrison is personally overseeing the operation." "What about the water?" Jennifer whispered, voicing the terror she'd been trying to suppress. "Could he have fallen overboard?" Santos met her eyes with practiced compassion. "Mrs. Caldwell, the railings on this ship are over 4 feet high. It's nearly impossible for a child to go over accidentally, and we have cameras monitoring most external deck areas. We're reviewing footage now. I need you to stay calm and trust that we're doing everything possible. But Jennifer couldn't stay calm. She couldn't stop imagining worst-case scenarios. Ethan trapped in a maintenance room, injured and unable to call for help. Ethan somehow slipping through a gap in the railings. Ethan taken by someone with dark intentions. The cruise industry's safety record was good, but not perfect. She'd read stories online before booking this trip, stories of people who vanished from cruise ships without a trace, lost to the endless ocean. At 2:30 p.m., Captain Andrew Morrison himself appeared. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, wearing his white uniform with gold stripes, his face etched with concern. Mrs. Caldwell, I want to assure you that this ship is on full alert. We have over 200 crew members actively searching. We've sealed all disembarkation points. No one is leaving this vessel. We've contacted the Coast Guard and they're standing by. We will find your son. His words should have been comforting, but they only amplified Jennifer's terror. The Coast Guard. That meant they were preparing for the possibility that Ethan had gone overboard. She felt dizzy, her vision tunneling. I need to search myself, she insisted, standing abruptly. I can't just sit here, please. Santos exchanged a glance with the captain, who nodded reluctantly. All right, but you'll go with Officer Santos. And Mrs. Caldwell, you need to prepare yourself. We're going to be checking every possible space on this ship, including areas that might be difficult. They started on Deck 6, where the Caldwell's cabin was located. Jennifer's hands shook as she unlocked the door with her keycard, half expecting to find Ethan curled up on his bed asleep. But the room was exactly as they'd left it that morning. Ethan's Nintendo DS on the nightstand, his sneakers kicked off near the bathroom door, his life jacket hanging in the closet as required by safety regulations. From there, they moved through the corridor, checking every public restroom, every storage closet, every emergency exit stairwell. Santos questioned crew members along the way. Had anyone seen a boy matching Ethan's description? Everyone shook their heads. One housekeeper mentioned seeing lots of children running around the arcade earlier, but couldn't remember specific faces. Deck 5 held the spa and fitness center. Deck 4 was crew quarters, off limits to passengers. Santos used his master keycard to access restricted areas, calling out Ethan's name in crew break rooms and laundry facilities. Nothing. Deck 3 held more passenger cabins, hundreds of identical doors stretching in both directions. Jennifer's hope began to crumble. By 4:00 p.m., they'd been searching for nearly 3 hours. Jennifer's throat was raw from calling Ethan's name. Her legs ached. The ship felt impossibly vast, a floating city with endless hiding places. How could one small boy simply vanish? They returned to guest services, where Santos reviewed security camera footage with his team. Jennifer watched over their shoulders, her heart lurching every time she saw a child on screen. But none of them were Ethan. The camera showed him clearly at 1:12 p.m., standing at the pool railing with Jennifer, pointing at something in the water. Then Jennifer walked away toward the ice cream stand, and Ethan remained at the railing for perhaps 30 seconds before stepping back from the camera's view, heading toward the interior corridor that connected to the main atrium. Stop! Go back! Jennifer said urgently. There. Who's that? In the background of the footage, partially obscured by a family carrying pool floats, was a man. Tall, maybe in his 50s, wearing dark sunglasses and a plain white polo shirt. He appeared to be watching Ethan. As Ethan moved toward the corridor, the man followed, staying about 20 feet behind. Santos rewound and enhanced the image as much as possible. The man's face was largely hidden by the sunglasses and the angle of the camera. Do you recognize him? Santos asked. Jennifer studied the screen, her blood running cold. No, I've never seen him before. Santos immediately radioed his team with a description of the man, ordering a review of all camera footage to track his movements. But the Royal Empress had thousands of passengers, many of them middle-aged men in polo shirts. Finding one specific person would be like finding a needle in a haystack. At 5:00 p.m., an announcement echoed through the ship's PA system, carefully worded to avoid panic. Attention all passengers and crew. We are currently searching for Ethan Caldwell, age 8, last seen wearing a blue Pokemon shirt and khaki shorts. If you have any information, please contact guest services immediately. This is not a drill. The mood on the ship shifted. Families held their children closer. Crew members intensified their searches. Jennifer could feel thousands of eyes watching. could hear whispered conversations as she and Santos continued their sweep of the ship. They checked the medical center, the casino, the library, the photo gallery where passengers browsed pictures taken by ship photographers. They descended to Deck 2, where the main theater and specialty restaurants were located. Every space was meticulously searched, every passenger questioned, and still nothing. As the sun began to set over the Caribbean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jennifer felt her last reserves of strength beginning to fail. 6 hours. Ethan had been missing for 6 hours. The reality of the situation was becoming undeniable. Her son hadn't simply wandered off. Something terrible had happened. Santos tried to convince her to rest, to eat something, but she refused. "I'm not stopping until I find him," she said, her voice hoarse, but determined. "I'll search every single cabin on this ship if I have to." Santos hesitated, then made a decision. "All right, but we'll need passenger cooperation. We can't force entry without probable cause, but we can request voluntary searches." They started on Deck 7, the deck where most interior cabins were located. Santos knocked on doors, explained the situation, and asked for permission to look inside. Most passengers agreed immediately, sympathetic and eager to help. Room after room, cabin after cabin, Jennifer peered into spaces that all looked the same. Beds, televisions, tiny bathrooms, suitcases, the intimate disorder of vacation life. Some passengers were less cooperative. An elderly man complained about the intrusion. A young couple claimed they'd been sleeping, but Santos's calm authority and Jennifer's desperate presence usually persuaded them to allow a quick look. And each time, Jennifer felt another piece of her hope die. Ethan wasn't in any of these rooms. By 7 p.m., they'd checked over 50 cabins. Jennifer's vision was blurring with exhaustion and unshed tears. They moved to Deck 8, where suites and more expensive accommodations were located. These were larger rooms, some with balconies, occupied by passengers who'd paid premium prices for their cruise experience. One suite in particular caught Santos's attention, cabin 8147. When he knocked, there was a long delay before the door cracked open. A man stood there, the same man from the security footage, though Jennifer didn't immediately recognize him without the sunglasses. He was in his early 50s, with thinning gray hair, pale skin, and an expression of mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth but cold. Santos explained the situation. "We're searching for a missing child. Would you mind if we took a quick look in your cabin?" The man, who identified himself as Marcus Brennan from Ohio, hesitated just a fraction too long. "I haven't seen any children. I've been in my cabin all afternoon. Quite ill, actually. Seasickness. I'd prefer not to be disturbed." Something in his demeanor set off alarm bells in Jennifer's mind. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet theirs, the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped the door, the fact that his cabin smelled faintly of something chemical, maybe cleaning solution. "Sir, this will only take a moment," Santos pressed. "We're asking all passengers to cooperate." Brennan's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, but I don't consent to a search. I know my rights. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause, I'm asking you to leave." Jennifer's maternal instinct screamed. Before Santos could respond, before she could second-guess herself, she shoved past Brennan into the cabin, ignoring his shout of protest. The suite was larger than her own cabin, with a separate sitting area, a king bed, and a balcony overlooking the ocean. Everything appeared orderly, almost obsessively clean. "Ma'am, you can't," Brennan started, but Jennifer was already moving, her eyes scanning every corner, every possible hiding place. She checked the bathroom, the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. Brennan was calling for security, his voice rising with indignation, but Jennifer didn't care. She dropped to her hands and knees, looking under the furniture, and that's when she saw it. Under the bed, in the shadows, a small hand, blue fabric, the edge of a Pokémon shirt. "Ethan!" Jennifer screamed, her voice raw with terror and relief. She grabbed the bedskirt and yanked, revealing her son's small body curled beneath the bed frame, his eyes half open, his skin pale, his breathing shallow but steady. He was alive. Everything that happened next was a blur. Santos immediately restrained Brennan, who began shouting about lawsuits and false accusations. Jennifer pulled Ethan out from under the bed, cradling him in her arms, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. He was groggy, barely conscious, clearly drugged with something. But he was alive. Her baby was alive. Ship security flooded the cabin within minutes. Ethan was rushed to the medical center. Jennifer refused to leave his side. riding with him on the stretcher, whispering that he was safe now, that Mommy was here. Medical staff immediately began treatment, checking his vital signs, drawing blood to determine what substance was in his system. Back in cabin 8147, security officers searched thoroughly and found damning evidence. Children's clothing that didn't belong to Brennan, including a pair of boys' swimming trunks, a bottle of sedatives prescribed to Brennan, a laptop that would later reveal horrifying contents, and most damning of all, printed cruise port schedules with notes about which ports had lax security, which ports would be easiest to disembark with a child unnoticed. Marcus Brennan was placed in the ship's holding cell, a small secured room used for the rare occasions when passengers became violent or committed crimes at sea. The Coast Guard was contacted. The ship altered course slightly to reach port faster, where real law enforcement would be waiting. In the medical center, Jennifer held Ethan's hand as he slowly regained consciousness. His first word was Mom, and then tears came, huge racking sobs as he clung to her. The ship's doctor confirmed he'd been sedated with a strong dose of benzodiazepines, likely slipped into a drink or snack. He would recover physically, but the psychological impact was yet to be determined. "Can you tell me what happened, honey?" Jennifer asked gently when Ethan had calmed enough to speak. "How did you end up in that man's room?" Ethan's voice was small, frightened. "He said he had the new Pokemon game in his cabin. He said I could play it if I came with him. I didn't think. I thought it would be okay. There are so many people around, you know? But then he gave me juice and everything got fuzzy. I tried to yell, but I couldn't. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry." Jennifer pulled him close, her own tears falling into his hair. "You have nothing to be sorry for, baby, nothing. This wasn't your fault. You're safe now. I've got you." As mother and son held each other in the ship's medical center, somewhere below in the holding cell, Marcus Brennan sat in silence, his carefully planned predation unraveled by a mother's refusal to give up, by those critical 6 hours of desperate searching, by the instinct that told Jennifer something was wrong about cabin 8147. The Royal Empress sailed on through the night toward Grand Cayman, carrying its passengers toward what should have been a tropical paradise, but now felt like the scene of a nightmare barely averted. For the Caldwell family, the dream vacation had become something else entirely, a reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in the middle of paradise, even when you're surrounded by 3,000 people and the endless blue sea. But evil had not won. Not this time. Ethan was found. The nightmare was over, or so Jennifer believed, as she sat in that medical center holding her son. What she didn't yet know was that the investigation into Marcus Brennan was just beginning, and what authorities would discover about this man would reveal a pattern of predation spanning years, multiple states and more victims than anyone could have imagined. The real story was only just starting. The Royal Empress docked in Georgetown, Grand Cayman at 8:47 a.m. on August 15, 2016, nearly 12 hours earlier than originally scheduled. Instead of the usual festive atmosphere of passengers disembarking for excursions and shopping, the port was surrounded by Royal Cayman Islands Police Service vehicles, their blue lights flashing in the humid morning air. Detective Inspector Claudia Marshall stood on the dock, her dark uniform crisp despite the heat, watching as ship security escorted Marcus Brennan down the gangway in handcuffs. Brennan walked with his head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Behind him, Captain Morrison personally accompanied the escort, his face grave. A crowd of passengers had gathered on the upper decks to watch, some filming with their phones, others simply staring in shocked silence. Word had spread throughout the ship overnight about what had happened, transforming Brennan from an anonymous passenger into a monster in their midst. Jennifer Caldwell watched from Deck 9, holding Ethan close. Her son had slept fitfully in the medical center, waking several times with nightmares. The ship's doctor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had stayed with them through the night, monitoring Ethan's recovery from the sedatives. By morning, the drug had mostly cleared his system, but the psychological wounds were fresh and raw. "Mom, is he going to jail?" Ethan asked quietly, his small hand gripping Jennifer's shirt. "Yes, baby. He's going to jail for a very long time," Jennifer replied, kissing the top of his head. "He can never hurt you or anyone else again." But even as she said the words, Jennifer wondered if they were true. The justice system didn't always work the way it should. She'd read enough news stories to know that predators sometimes walked free on technicalities, or received sentences that seemed absurdly light for the crimes they'd committed. The thought of Brennan being released, of him being out in the world where he could target other children, made her physically ill. Detective Inspector Marshall took custody of Brennan at the dock, formally arresting him under Cayman Islands law for kidnapping and attempted child endangerment. Because the crime occurred in international waters on a ship flagged in the Bahamas, but operated by an American company, jurisdiction was complicated. Marshall explained that Brennan would be held in Cayman custody, while authorities from the United States, the Bahamas, and Interpol coordinated the investigation. Mr. Brennan, you're being detained on suspicion of child abduction and related offenses, Marshall stated formally, reading him his rights under Cayman law. You'll be transported to HMP Northward for processing. Do you understand these rights? Brennan's only response was a slight nod. His lawyer, hastily contacted via satellite phone during the night crossing, would meet them at the police station. But Marshall had been a detective for 16 years, specializing in crimes against children, and she knew guilt when she saw it. This man's silence wasn't the silence of innocence, it was the silence of someone calculating his next move. Back on the ship, FBI Special Agent Derek Wilson boarded with a team of federal agents. The moment the ship entered Cayman territorial waters, it became subject to local jurisdiction. But because Brennan was an American citizen and the victim was American, and because the cruise line was American-owned, the FBI had legitimate interest in the case. Wilson was a tall man in his late 40s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Captain Morrison met him at the ship's security office, where Brennan's cabin had been sealed as a crime scene. Agent Wilson, thank you for coming so quickly. This is Miguel Santos, our head of security. He's been coordinating with local authorities. Wilson shook hands with both men, then got straight to business. I need to see the cabin, review all security footage, and interview the victim and witnesses. We're treating this as a federal kidnapping case. The moment Brennan moved that child from a public area to a private cabin with intent to transport him off the ship, he violated federal law. The three men proceeded to cabin 8147. Wilson's team had already begun processing the scene, photographing every detail, collecting evidence. The laptop found in Brennan's possession was being carefully secured for forensic analysis. Initial examination revealed it was password protected with multiple encryption layers, suggesting Brennan had taken significant steps to hide its contents. What else did you find? Wilson asked the forensic technician, a young woman named Agent Lisa Torres. Torres consulted her notes. Beyond the laptop, we found a locked briefcase under the bed, where the victim was hidden. We haven't opened it yet, waiting for your authorization. There's also a smartphone, also encrypted, multiple prepaid phone cards, and this. She held up an evidence bag containing a small notebook filled with handwritten entries. Wilson took the bag, studying the notebook through the plastic. The handwriting was neat, almost obsessively so, with dates going back several years. Each entry appeared to document locations, dates, and what looked like physical descriptions. His stomach turned as he realized what he was looking at. A predator's hunting journal. Bag everything, Wilson ordered. I want this cabin processed like a murder scene. Every fingerprint, every fiber, every possible piece of evidence, and get a warrant for that briefcase immediately. While Wilson's team worked, Jennifer was being interviewed by Detective Marshall in a private office provided by the ship. Ethan was with Dr. Chen, undergoing a more thorough medical examination to document any physical evidence of what had happened to him. Jennifer had wanted to stay with him, but Marshall gently insisted that her statement needed to be taken while the events were still fresh in her memory. Mrs. Caldwell, I know this is difficult, but I need you to walk me through everything again, in as much detail as possible, Marshall said, her voice kind but professional. Start from when you first realized Ethan was missing. Jennifer repeated the story she'd told Santos the day before, but this time with more detail. She described the ice cream stand, the exact moment she'd turned around and Ethan was gone, the rising panic as minutes turned to hours. She described the security footage showing the man following Ethan, her growing certainty that something terrible had happened. When you entered Brennan's cabin, what made you suspect Ethan might be there? Marshall asked. Instinct, Jennifer said honestly. The way Brennan acted when we knocked. He was nervous, defensive, and the smell in the cabin like he'd been cleaning something. But more than that, it was just a feeling. A mother's intuition, I guess. I knew something was wrong about him. Marshall made notes, then asked carefully, had you seen Brennan before? Earlier in the cruise, perhaps? Jennifer thought hard, trying to remember. The Royal Empress carried thousands of passengers. Most faces blurred together. I don't think so. Not that I can recall specifically. But there are so many people on this ship. Did Ethan mention anyone befriending him? Anyone who seemed particularly interested in talking to him? No, Jennifer said, then hesitated. Wait. The first night at dinner in the main dining room, there was a man at the table next to ours. He was traveling alone, which seemed a little odd for a cruise. He asked Ethan about his Pokémon shirt, what his favorite character was. Ethan talked to him for a few minutes. I didn't think anything of it at the time. People are friendly on cruises, you know. But now, she felt sick. Could that have been Brennan? We'll review footage from the dining room, Marshall assured her. If it was him, that suggests premeditation. He was selecting his target, building rapport. The word target made Jennifer's blood run cold. Her son had been targeted, stalked, groomed, all while she was right there, oblivious. What kind of mother didn't notice a predator circling her child? As if reading her thoughts, Marshall leaned forward. Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to hear this. You did nothing wrong. Predators like Brennan are professionals. They're skilled at manipulation, at appearing normal and trustworthy. The fact that you found Ethan, that you trusted your instincts and kept searching when others might have given up, that makes you a hero. Your son is alive because of you. Tears streamed down Jennifer's face and she nodded, unable to speak. Meanwhile, in the ship's medical center, Ethan was being examined by Dr. Chen and a pediatric specialist who'd been flown in from the Cayman Islands. The examination was thorough but gentle, designed to document any evidence of assault while minimizing trauma to the child. Jennifer had been assured that a victim advocate was present throughout, and that Ethan could stop the examination at any time if he became too distressed. When it was over, the pediatric specialist, Dr. Marcus Reed, met with Jennifer privately. I have good news, he said. There's no evidence of sexual assault. Ethan appears to have been sedated and restrained, but not otherwise physically harmed. The sedatives will fully clear his system within another 12 to 24 hours. Physically, he should make a complete recovery. Jennifer felt a wave of relief so intense she nearly collapsed. Thank God. Oh, thank God. However, Dr. Reed continued gently, the psychological impact of this experience could be significant. Ethan will need trauma-focused therapy. He may experience nightmares, anxiety, fear of strangers or enclosed spaces. Some children develop symptoms of PTSD. I'm going to give you referrals for excellent child psychologists in your area who specialize in this type of trauma. Jennifer took the list of names, folding the paper carefully and putting it in her purse. Whatever he needs, I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Back at the police station in Georgetown, Brennan sat in an interrogation room with his lawyer, a local attorney named Richard Cornwall who specialized in criminal defense. Cornwall had advised Brennan to say nothing, to invoke his right to silence until they fully understood what evidence the authorities had. But Brennan seemed almost eager to talk, as if he needed to justify himself, to explain. Detective Marshall sat across from him, a recording device on the table between them. Mr. Brennan, before we begin, I want to confirm you understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand? I understand, Brennan said calmly. His demeanor had changed since the morning. Now he seemed collected, almost professorial. But I want to clarify something. I didn't hurt that boy. I would never hurt a child. Cornwall put a hand on Brennan's arm. Marcus, I strongly advise you not to speak. Brennan shook him off. No, I need to explain. This is all a misunderstanding. Marshall kept her expression neutral, but internally she was surprised. Most suspects who were guilty either went silent or denied everything. Brennan seemed to be taking a different approach, one that suggested he'd thought carefully about what to say. All right, Mr. Brennan. Tell me what happened from your perspective, Marshall said. Brennan leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I saw the boy wandering alone near the pool area. He looked lost, confused. I was concerned for his safety. You know how dangerous cruise ships can be for unattended children? People fall overboard. They get hurt. So I approached him and asked if he needed help finding his parents. And then, Marshall prompted, he said he couldn't find his mother. He was starting to get upset. I offered to help him look for her, but he seemed so distressed that I suggested he come to my cabin to calm down first. I was going to call security from there, let them handle it properly. I gave him some juice and told him to sit on the bed while I called. But then he said he felt sleepy and laid down. I thought he was just tired from the sun. I was about to call security when that woman burst into my cabin screaming. Marshall let the silence stretch, watching Brennan carefully. His story was plausible on the surface, but riddled with inconsistencies. Mr. Brennan, if you were planning to call security, why didn't you? Why was Ethan under your bed hidden when his mother found him? Brennan's expression flickered, just for a moment. He must have rolled under there while sleeping, I didn't realize. And the sedatives found in your cabin? The same sedatives that were in Ethan's system? I take those for anxiety. The boy must have accidentally ingested some. Perhaps he drank from my glass by mistake. Cornwall was shaking his head, clearly frustrated with his client's decision to speak. Marshall could see the lawyer knew this statement would destroy any defense they might have built. But she let Brennan continue, giving him rope to hang himself. Mr. Brennan, we found several concerning items in your cabin. Children's clothing that doesn't belong to you, port schedules with notes about security procedures, and a notebook that appears to document surveillance of children over a period of several years. How do you explain that? For the first time, Brennan's composure cracked. His eyes darted to Cornwall, then back to Marshall. I want to stop this interview now. I want my lawyer. Of course, Marshall said smoothly, standing. Interview terminated at 11:34 a.m. She turned off the recorder, then leaned down so her face was level with Brennan's. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with steel. We're going to find everything, Mr. Brennan. Every victim, every crime, every secret you've been keeping. And you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about the children whose lives you destroyed. Brennan stared at her, and in his eyes, Marshall saw something that chilled her to the bone. Not remorse, not fear, but calculation. He was already planning his defense, already figuring out what he could deny, what he could spin, how he could minimize the consequences of what he'd done. Back on the Royal Empress, Agent Wilson was reviewing the contents of Brennan's briefcase, which had been opened with a court-authorized warrant. Inside were documents that painted a disturbing picture, printed articles about cruise ships and their security protocols, lists of cruise lines and their typical passenger demographics, photographs of children, dozens of them, taken surreptitiously in public places, shopping malls, parks, beaches, and most damning of all, a collection of newspaper clippings about missing children cases from across the United States, some dating back over a decade. Wilson spread the contents across a table in the ship's security office, photographing each item methodically. Captain Morrison watched, his face pale. How long has he been doing this? Morrison asked quietly. That's what we're going to find out, Wilson replied grimly. But based on what I'm seeing here, Brennan has been actively hunting children for years. The question is, how many he successfully abducted before Ethan Caldwell? How many families never got the ending the Caldwells got? The investigation was expanding rapidly. FBI field offices across the country were being alerted. Interpol was coordinating with international law enforcement. Brennan's home in Columbus, Ohio was being searched by federal agents. His computers, his records, his entire life was being dismantled piece by piece. And in the medical center of the Royal Empress, Jennifer held Ethan as he slept, finally peaceful after Dr. Chen gave him a mild sedative to help him rest. She stroked his hair and made a silent promise. She would see this through. She would testify at Brennan's trial. She would make sure he never had the opportunity to hurt another child. The nightmare had ended for the Caldwells, but for Marcus Brennan and for the law enforcement agencies now investigating him, the real work was just beginning. The secrets buried in that encrypted laptop, in those carefully kept journals, in the mind of a predator were about to be exposed to the light. And what they would reveal would be worse than anyone imagined. 2 weeks after the Royal Empress docked in Grand Cayman, FBI Special Agent Derek Wilson sat in a windowless conference room at the Cincinnati field office, staring at a computer screen that displayed the contents of Marcus Brennan's laptop. It had taken the Bureau's best digital forensic specialists 9 days to crack the encryption, working around the clock to bypass multiple layers of security. What they found inside was a digital house of horrors that had kept Wilson awake for 3 consecutive nights. Jesus Christ, muttered Agent Lisa Torres, who sat beside him reviewing the same files. How many are there? Wilson scrolled through folder after folder, each meticulously organized by location and date. Photographs of children, hundreds of them, taken at beaches, theme parks, shopping malls, and cruise ships across the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Some photos appeared innocent at first glance, just children playing or walking with their families. But when viewed in sequence, they told a darker story. Brennan had been stalking these children, documenting their routines, their families, their vulnerabilities. At least 200 distinct victims documented here, Wilson said, his voice tight with controlled rage. And these are just the ones he photographed. There could be more. The laptop also contained detailed journals, typed entries that read like hunting logs. Brennan had documented his methods with disturbing precision: how to identify vulnerable targets, how to approach children without alarming their parents, how to gain trust quickly, which cruise lines had the weakest security protocols, which ports had the most chaotic disembarkation procedures. One entry from March 2014 made Wilson's stomach turn. Carnival Pride, Western Caribbean route. Identified potential target, male, age 78, traveling with elderly grandparents who struggle to maintain supervision. Grandparents spend afternoons at ship's casino. Child frequents arcade alone. Approached during ice cream social, discussed video games. Built rapport over 2 days. Grandfather interrupted during final approach. Target not acquired. Recommend focusing on single-parent families in future. Less supervision, more vulnerability. He's been refining his technique for years, Torres said, reading over Wilson's shoulder. Learning from failed attempts. This is a professional operation. Wilson opened another folder labeled Successful Acquisitions and immediately regretted it. Inside were photographs and journal entries about children who had disappeared, children Brennan claimed to have taken. The entries were clinical, detached, describing each abduction with the emotional distance of someone documenting a business transaction. We need to cross-reference these with missing persons databases immediately, Wilson said, reaching for his phone. Every name, every date, every location. If even half of what he's claiming is true, we're looking at one of the most prolific child predators in recent history. Back in Columbus, Ohio, Jennifer Caldwell was trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy for Ethan. They'd returned home 3 days after the incident, cutting their vacation short. The cruise line had refunded their entire fare and offered to pay for Ethan's counseling, a gesture Jennifer appreciated, but found insufficient given what her son had endured on their ship. Ethan was seeing Dr. Patricia Winters, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, 3 times a week. The sessions were helping, but progress was slow. Ethan had nightmares almost every night, waking up screaming that someone was trying to take him. He refused to sleep in his own bed anymore, insisting on sleeping in Jennifer's room where he could see her at all times. He'd become clingy and anxious, terrified whenever Jennifer left his sight even for a moment. This is completely normal after what he experienced, Dr. Winters had assured Jennifer during their last family session. Ethan's sense of safety has been shattered. He trusted an adult who betrayed that trust in the most traumatic way possible. Rebuilding his ability to feel secure in the world will take time, possibly years. But he's a resilient child, and with proper support, he can recover. Jennifer wanted to believe that, but watching her formerly outgoing, adventurous son become fearful and withdrawn was heartbreaking. The boy who used to beg to ride his bike around the neighborhood now refused to go outside without her. The child who loved school and had dozens of friends now had panic attacks at the thought of returning to class, terrified that the man from the ship would somehow find him there. The media attention hadn't helped. Local news outlets had picked up the story within days of their return. Boy rescued from predator on cruise ship, read the headlines. Reporters camped outside their modest 2-story home in the Clintonville neighborhood, trying to get interviews. Jennifer had to disconnect their landline after receiving dozens of calls from tabloids offering money for exclusive rights to their story. "Mom, are those people still outside?" Ethan asked, peering through the living room curtains at the news vans parked across the street. "Don't worry about them, baby," Jennifer said, gently pulling him away from the window. "They'll leave eventually. How about we make those chocolate chip cookies you like?" Baking had become one of their coping mechanisms, a way to fill the anxious hours with something comforting and familiar. As they measured flour and sugar, Ethan seemed to relax slightly, the repetitive task giving him something to focus on besides his fears. The phone rang, the new unlisted number they'd gotten. Jennifer checked the caller ID and saw it was Agent Wilson. She'd been expecting his call. He'd warned her that once they analyzed Brennan's computers, they might need to interview Ethan again to confirm details that could help connect Brennan to other crimes. "Hello, Agent Wilson," Jennifer answered, keeping her voice neutral so as not to alarm Ethan. "Mrs. Caldwell, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to update you on the investigation and discuss next steps." Wilson's voice was professional but kind, the same tone he'd used during his initial interview with them the day after the incident. "Hold on 1 second, Jennifer said, then turned to Ethan. "Honey, can you finish stirring while I take this call in the other room?" Ethan nodded and Jennifer stepped into the dining room, pulling the door partially closed. "What did you find?" Wilson took a breath. "Mrs. Caldwell, What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I want you to understand the full scope of what your son escaped. We've analyzed Brennan's laptop and other digital evidence. He's been abducting children for at least 12 years, possibly longer. We've identified over 200 potential victims in his files, and we're working to determine which cases represent actual abductions versus surveillance that didn't result in a crime. Jennifer felt the room spin. She grabbed the back of a dining chair to steady herself. 200 children. We've positively linked Brennan to 7 missing children cases spanning from 2004 to 2015, Wilson continued. These are cases where the circumstances match his documented methods and where we have physical or digital evidence placing him in the area at the time of the disappearance. We're working with local law enforcement in each jurisdiction to build prosecutable cases. Are those children alive? Jennifer asked, though she already knew the answer from Wilson's tone. We don't know yet. 3 of the cases are recent enough that there's hope, but 4 of them are over 5 years old. We're following every lead, but I need to be honest with you, the odds of finding these children alive decrease significantly with time. Jennifer closed her eyes, thinking about 7 other mothers who had lived through the nightmare she'd narrowly avoided. 7 families whose children hadn't been found in time. What do you need from us? We're building a federal case against Brennan that will supersede the local charges in Cayman. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants to prosecute him for multiple counts of kidnapping, child exploitation, and related charges that carry much longer sentences than what he'd face for the Ethan's case alone. To do that effectively, we need Ethan to testify about what happened. I know that's asking a lot, and we can discuss ways to minimize his trauma, but his testimony would be crucial. Jennifer looked toward the kitchen, where she could hear Ethan humming softly as he baked. The thought of putting him through a trial, making him recount his ordeal in front of strangers, possibly in front of Brennan himself, was unbearable. But the thought of Brennan receiving a light sentence, or worse, being acquitted on a technicality, was equally unbearable. When would the trial be? She asked. Likely not for another year, maybe longer. These cases are complex and the defense will try every delay tactic possible. That gives Ethan time to continue healing before he has to testify. And Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to know we have victim advocates who specialize in helping children prepare for courtroom testimony. There are also options for closed-circuit testimony where Ethan wouldn't have to be in the same room as Brennan. I need to think about it, Jennifer said. I need to talk to his therapist, see what she recommends. Ethan's recovery has to be our priority. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll email you information about the victim advocacy resources available. And Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to know that what you did, finding Ethan, trusting your instincts, that action has blown this case wide open. Because of you, we have a chance to get justice for those other families. You saved your son, and you may have saved countless future victims by stopping Brennan. After hanging up, Jennifer stood in the dining room for several minutes, processing what she'd learned. 200 children documented, 7 confirmed abductions. How many others were there who weren't documented? How many near misses like Ethan who were never reported? The scope of Brennan's predation was almost incomprehensible. Meanwhile, at the Cayman Islands detention facility, Marcus Brennan sat in his cell reading legal documents his attorney had brought. The initial charges filed in Cayman were relatively minor: unlawful restraint and child endangerment, which carried maximum sentences of 5 to 7 years. Brennan had been confident he could beat those charges, or at least negotiate a plea deal that would see him free in 3 years with good behavior. But now Cornwall had delivered news that changed everything. The FBI was preparing federal charges under the Lindbergh Law, which made it a federal crime to transport a kidnapped victim across state lines or international borders. The fact that Brennan had taken Ethan from a public deck to his private cabin, with the documented intent to disembark with him at the next port, constituted interstate transportation for purposes of the statute. The federal charges carried a minimum of 20 years and a maximum of life in prison. They're offering a plea deal, Cornwall said, sitting across from Brennan in the small consultation room. If you plead guilty to the federal kidnapping charge and agree to cooperate with their investigation into other cases, they'll recommend a sentence of 25 years instead of life. You'd be eligible for parole after serving 20. Brennan shook his head. 20 years? I'd be 72 years old. That's not acceptable. Marcus, you need to understand the reality of your situation. They have overwhelming evidence against you. The laptop alone is damning, but combined with physical evidence from your cabin, witness testimony, and the victim's own account, this is an unwinnable case. If you go to trial and lose, you'll die in prison. At least with the plea deal, there's a possibility of freedom before you're too old to enjoy it. I want to go to trial, Brennan insisted. I'll testify in my own defense. I'll explain that everything was a misunderstanding, that my intentions were misinterpreted. Juries are sympathetic to defendants who seem reasonable and articulate. Cornwall looked at his client with barely disguised disgust. In 30 years of criminal defense work, he'd represented murderers, drug dealers, and white-collar criminals. But there was something particularly repellent about Brennan's calm rationalization of his crimes, his absolute refusal to accept responsibility. The prosecution has 7 other families ready to testify about children who disappeared under circumstances identical to the Caldwell case, Cornwall said bluntly. They have your journals describing these abductions in detail. They have photographs you took of these children. They have everything, Marcus. There is no defense strategy that can overcome that evidence. Brennan was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the metal table. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and calculating. Then we attack the victim. We make the jury question whether an 8-year-old boy's testimony is reliable. Children are suggestible. They can be coached. We argue that the mother planted memories in his head, that she's making this a bigger deal than it is for attention or a future lawsuit against the cruise line. Cornwall stood abruptly, gathering his papers. I can't be part of that defense strategy. It's not just morally repugnant, it won't work. But more importantly, I won't participate in further victimizing a child who's already been traumatized. You need to find new counsel, Mr. Brennan, because I'm withdrawing from this case effective immediately. After Cornwall left, Brennan sat alone in the consultation room, his mind racing. He'd been so careful over the years, so meticulous about covering his tracks, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated a mother's determination. Jennifer Caldwell was supposed to give up after a few hours of searching. Security was supposed to assume Ethan had gone overboard. By the time the ship reached port, it would have been too late, and Brennan would have disappeared into the chaos of a busy cruise terminal with one more acquisition to add to his collection. But none of that had happened, and now everything was unraveling. Back in Cincinnati, Agent Wilson's team had made a breakthrough. They'd identified one of the children in Brennan's files, a boy named Tyler Mitchell who had disappeared from a cruise ship in 2013, 3 years before Ethan's abduction. Tyler had been 9 years old, traveling with his divorced mother on a Caribbean cruise. According to the case file, he'd vanished from the ship's arcade during a port day in Cozumel, Mexico. Despite extensive searches of the ship in the port area, Tyler was never found. Brennan's journal contained an entry dated to match Tyler's disappearance. Royal Caribbean Navigator, Western Caribbean. Successful acquisition, male age 9, single mother distracted by shore excursion planning. Target secured during port chaos in Cozumel. Transport via taxi to predetermined location. Mother reported disappearance 90 minutes after acquisition. Too late for port security to be effective. Clean exit. Wilson immediately contacted the Cozumel Police Department and the FBI's legal attaché in Mexico City. If Brennan had taken Tyler off the ship in Cozumel, there might be a trail. Taxi records, security camera footage from the port, anything that could tell them where Brennan had gone and what had happened to Tyler Mitchell. The investigation was becoming an international effort, with law enforcement agencies from 6 countries coordinating to track Brennan's movements over the past decade. Every cruise he'd taken, every port he'd visited, every documented interaction with children was being scrutinized. And at the center of it all was one question that haunted Wilson. How many children had Marcus Brennan destroyed? How many families had been torn apart by this predator who had hidden in plain sight, using the anonymity of cruise ships and tourist destinations to hunt his victims? The answer, Wilson feared, would be worse than anyone imagined, but he was determined to find out. For Ethan Caldwell, who had escaped, for Tyler Mitchell and the others who hadn't, and for all the future victims who would be spared because one mother refused to give up. 6 months after Marcus Brennan's arrest, on a cold February morning in 2017, Jennifer Caldwell sat in the office of Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Hartman in downtown Cincinnati. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the city in white. Inside, the atmosphere was tense as Hartman laid out photographs and documents across her desk, evidence that would form the backbone of the federal prosecution against Brennan. Mrs. Caldwell, I want to prepare you for what's coming, Hartman said, her voice gentle but firm. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She'd built her career prosecuting child exploitation cases and had a reputation for being relentless in the courtroom. The defense is going to try everything to discredit Ethan's testimony. They'll argue he was confused, that he misremembered events, that you influenced his recollection. We need to be ready for that. Jennifer nodded, her jaw tight. Ethan was upstairs in the building's child-friendly waiting room with a victim advocate, playing video games and eating snacks, unaware of the difficult conversation happening below. Ethan knows what happened to him. He's been consistent about the details since day one. I know, Hartman replied, and that consistency will help us. But I need you to understand that testifying will be traumatic for him. Brennan's new attorney, a man named Charles Vickers, is known for aggressive cross-examination tactics. He'll push Ethan, try to confuse him, make him doubt his own memories. It's going to be difficult to watch. Can't we do something to protect him? The closed-circuit testimony you mentioned? Hartman shook her head. Brennan's attorney has already filed a motion opposing that. He's arguing that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the defendant's right to confront his accuser face-to-face. The judge hasn't ruled yet, but preliminary indications are that he's leaning toward allowing closed-circuit testimony only if we can prove that having Ethan in the same room as Brennan would cause severe psychological harm. It would, Jennifer said immediately. Ethan still has nightmares about that man. Just seeing his face on television when the news covers the case sends him into panic attacks. Then we'll need Dr. Winters to provide expert testimony about Ethan's psychological state, Hartman said, making a note. Her professional opinion that direct confrontation would be harmful could sway the judge. But Mrs. Caldwell, you need to prepare for the possibility that Ethan will have to testify in open court with Brennan present. Jennifer felt sick at the thought. Over the past 6 months, Ethan had made progress in therapy. The nightmares were less frequent. He'd returned to school, though with accommodations that allowed him to leave class if he felt anxious. He was slowly rebuilding his sense of safety in the world, but putting him in a courtroom with Brennan could undo all that progress. What if I say no? Jennifer asked. What if I refuse to let him testify? Hartman's expression was sympathetic but firm. Then our case becomes significantly weaker. We have physical evidence in Brennan's own journals, but defense attorneys are skilled at creating reasonable doubt. They'll argue the journals are fiction, creative writing. They'll claim the sedatives in Ethan's system were accidentally ingested. They'll paint Brennan as a lonely man who made a mistake in judgment but had no criminal intent. Without Ethan's testimony describing how Brennan lured him to the cabin, how he felt when he realized something was wrong, we lose the human element that makes this case compelling to a jury. But you have 7 other families, 7 other missing children, Jennifer protested. Can't they testify? Those cases are circumstantial, Hartman explained. We can prove Brennan was on the same cruise ships when those children disappeared. We can show his journals describing abductions that match those cases, but we can't put those children on the stand because we haven't found them. Ethan is the only living victim who can testify directly about what Brennan did. His testimony isn't just about getting justice for what happened to him. It's about making sure Brennan never has the opportunity to hurt another child. Jennifer looked out the window at the falling snow, thinking about Tyler Mitchell and the 6 other children who had vanished. Their families had no closure, no answers, just an endless waiting and wondering. At least she had Ethan back. At least her nightmare had an ending where her son survived. I'll talk to him, Jennifer finally said. I'll explain why his testimony matters, but if he says he can't do it, if it's too much for him, I won't force him. That's all I'm asking, Hartman said. And Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to know that regardless of what Ethan decides, we're moving forward with this prosecution. We have enough evidence to convict Brennan on the kidnapping charge related to Ethan. It may not be the life sentence I'm hoping for, but it will be substantial prison time. Meanwhile, in the federal detention center where Brennan was being held pending trial, his new attorney Charles Vickers was reviewing the prosecution's evidence. Vickers was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s who had made millions defending white-collar criminals and the occasional high-profile violent offender. He'd taken Brennan's case partly for the publicity, and partly because he genuinely believed everyone deserved a vigorous defense regardless of the charges. They have a strong case, Vickers admitted, sitting across from Brennan in a consultation room. The physical evidence from your cabin is damning. The journals are problematic. But cases can be won or lost on how the jury perceives the victim. If we can create doubt about the boy's testimony, we can create doubt about the entire narrative. Brennan leaned forward, his eyes bright with calculation. Tell me about the mother, Jennifer Caldwell. What's her background? Vickers consulted his notes. Divorced, works as a dental hygienist, middle class, no criminal record, no history of making false accusations or seeking media attention. She's credible, sympathetic. The jury will like her. What about financial problems? Debts? Could she be motivated by the possibility of a civil lawsuit against the cruise line? She's not wealthy, but she's not desperate, Vickers replied. And even if she were, that's a weak defense strategy. You're suggesting a mother would coach her child to make false accusations of kidnapping for financial gain? No jury is going to believe that, especially not when we have your journals describing similar incidents. Those journals are creative writing, Brennan said smoothly. I'm a writer, I create fictional scenarios, it's a hobby. None of those entries describe real events. Vickers looked at his client with barely concealed skepticism. Marcus, you understand that 7 children matching your fictional descriptions actually disappeared from cruise ships on dates matching your journal entries. The prosecution is going to argue that's not coincidence, it's confession. Then we argue that I became interested in these cases after reading about them in the news, that I incorporated real events into my fictional writing. There's no law against that. Vickers set down his pen and met Brennan's eyes directly. Let me be clear about something. My job is to provide you with the best possible defense within the bounds of legal ethics. But I'm not going to knowingly present false testimony or make arguments I believe to be frivolous. If you're innocent of these charges, if there's a genuine explanation for the evidence that doesn't involve criminal behavior, then I'll argue that vigorously. But if you're guilty and the evidence suggests you are, then our best strategy is negotiating a plea deal that minimizes your prison time. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do, Brennan said coldly. Then we're going to trial, Vickers replied, and I need you to understand what that means. The prosecution will paint you as a monster. They'll parade photographs of missing children in front of the jury. They'll have the Caldwell boy testify about how frightened he was, how he thought he was going to die. They'll present your journals, your photographs, your meticulously documented surveillance of children. By the time they're done, the jury won't see you as a human being. They'll see you as every parent's worst nightmare. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Brennan's face. Can we win? Honestly? No, Vickers said bluntly. Not unless something unexpected happens. Not unless the boy's testimony falls apart on cross-examination, or unless we can exclude key pieces of evidence on technicalities. Our best hope is creating enough doubt that the jury convicts you on lesser charges with shorter sentences. But Marcus, you need to prepare yourself for the strong likelihood that you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. After Vickers left, Brennan sat alone in his cell, contemplating his situation. He'd spent years perfecting his methods, learning from mistakes, adapting his techniques. He'd believed he was smarter than law enforcement, that he could continue his activities indefinitely without consequences. But Jennifer Caldwell had proven him wrong. One determined mother had unraveled everything. The cell was small and cold, with gray concrete walls and a narrow window that looked out on nothing but another wall. This was his future now, decades of confinement in spaces like this. Unless he could find a way to change the narrative, to make the jury see him as something other than a predator. Back in Columbus, Jennifer sat down with Ethan that evening after dinner. They'd developed a routine of talking before bed, a time when Ethan seemed most willing to share his feelings about what had happened. Dr. Winters had encouraged this, saying that processing trauma required repeated discussion in a safe environment. "Honey, I need to talk to you about something important," Jennifer began, sitting beside him on the couch in their living room. "You know how the man from the ship, Mr. Brennan, is going to have a trial where a judge decides what happens to him?" Ethan nodded, his small face serious, "to see if he goes to jail." "Right. And the lawyers who are trying to make sure he goes to jail, they've asked if you would be willing to talk to the judge and jury about what happened on the ship, to tell them your story." Ethan's eyes widened with fear. Would he be there? Would I have to see him? "Maybe," Jennifer said honestly, taking his hand. "They're trying to set it up so you wouldn't have to be in the same room so you could talk to the judge through a video screen. But I don't know yet if that will be allowed. And baby, I need you to understand something. If this is too scary, if you don't want to do it, that's okay. I will never force you to do something that makes you feel unsafe. But if I don't talk, he might not go to jail?" Ethan asked. Jennifer chose her words carefully. "The lawyers have lots of evidence against him, so he'll probably go to jail either way. But your story is important. It helps people understand what he did and why it was wrong. And honey, there are other kids whose parents are still looking for them. Kids who disappeared like you almost did. If you testify, it might help their families too." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his small fingers playing with the edge of a couch cushion. "I have nightmares about him," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I dream that he finds me again, that he takes me somewhere you can't find me. I'm scared, Mom. I know you are, baby, and that's completely normal. Anyone would be scared after what you went through. But Dr. Winters says that sometimes telling our story and seeing bad people face consequences helps us feel less scared. It helps us feel like we have power again. Will you be there with me?" Ethan asked. "Every single second," Jennifer promised, pulling him into a hug. "I will never leave you alone with this. We'll face it together, whatever you decide." Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked with Dr. Winters to process his feelings about potentially testifying. The therapist used techniques like role-playing and art therapy to help him understand what courtroom testimony would involve and to give him tools for managing his anxiety. Slowly, tentatively, Ethan began to accept that he could do this, that his voice mattered. In March 2017, Judge Harold Martinez ruled on the defense's motion regarding testimony procedures. After reviewing Dr. Winters' detailed psychological evaluation and hearing arguments from both sides, he decided to allow Ethan to testify via closed-circuit television. The courtroom would have a screen showing Ethan's image, but Ethan would be in a separate room with only Jennifer, Dr. Winters, and a victim advocate present. Brennan would be able to see and hear Ethan's testimony, but Ethan would not have to see Brennan. This is a reasonable accommodation that protects the psychological well-being of a child victim, while still preserving the defendant's constitutional right to confront his accuser, Judge Martinez wrote in his ruling. The court finds that requiring this 8-year-old child to testify in the physical presence of the man who kidnapped and drugged him would cause severe and lasting psychological harm that outweighs any minimal benefit to the defendant's ability to observe the witness's demeanor. Vickers immediately filed an appeal, arguing that the ruling violated Brennan's rights, but the appellate court upheld Judge Martinez's decision. The trial was scheduled for September 2017, giving both sides 8 months to prepare. As the months passed, Agent Wilson expanded the investigation, uncovering Brennan's pattern of traveling alone on 37 cruises over 15 years. They connected him to 12 disappearances, with 7 strong enough for potential charges. The case that haunted Wilson most was Tyler Mitchell, the 9-year-old who vanished in Cozumel in 2013. CCTV showed a man resembling Brennan leaving the port with a small boy, and a hotel clerk recalled the pair checking in for one night. After that, the trail went dead. Wilson promised Tyler's mother they wouldn't stop searching. Meanwhile, Jennifer prepared for the upcoming trial while supporting Ethan through his inconsistent recovery. Some days he seemed like a normal 8-year-old. Others he was overcome by fear. Media attention intensified, branding Brennan as the cruise ship predator. Jennifer avoided interviews, wanting to shield Ethan from the spotlight. One night, Ethan told her he was ready to testify. Jennifer reassured him he was brave and that none of what happened was his fault. As September approached, she vowed to see the case through, for Ethan, for Tyler, and for all the missing children. On September 18, 2017, the courthouse overflowed with reporters and protesters demanding justice. Jury selection finished with 12 solemn jurors. Jennifer sat behind the prosecution while Ethan waited in a secure room with a therapy dog. Brennan entered in a polished gray suit, carefully styled to look harmless, an image crafted by his attorney, Charles Vickers. Judge Martinez opened the trial and both sides declared readiness. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Hartman gave a powerful opening statement, describing Ethan's disappearance, the frantic search, and the horrifying discovery of the drugged child hidden in Brennan's cabin. She outlined evidence, sedatives, children's clothing, and journals documenting years of predation. She told the jury Brennan had targeted Ethan deliberately and would have succeeded if Jennifer hadn't found him. Vickers countered with a subdued defense, claiming Brennan acted out of concern for a lost child. He argued the journals were fiction and the sedatives were accidental, urging the jury to separate emotion from fact and find reasonable doubt. The prosecution opened with Jennifer's testimony, recounting the day Ethan vanished on the cruise ship. Hartman carefully established the timeline and her emotional state. During cross-examination, Vickers tried to frame her as negligent, but the judge shut down his attempts to blame the mother for Brennan's crimes. Testimony continued with ship security, medical personnel, and FBI agents. Agent Wilson described the disturbing contents of Brennan's laptop. Hundreds of photos and journals documenting surveillance and abductions. Families of other missing children also testified. Susan Mitchell spoke about her son Tyler, missing since 2013, insisting Brennan's journals matched his disappearance. The judge allowed the testimony only to show pattern and motive. On the sixth day, Ethan testified from a child-friendly room, his face displayed in the courtroom. He explained how Brennan lured him with talk of a new Pokemon game, gave him drugged juice, and how everything went blurry until he woke up with his mother. His testimony was heartbreaking and consistent. Vickers' attempts to cast doubt failed. The defense rested without calling Brennan. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 48 hours and returned a unanimous guilty verdict. 3 months later, at sentencing, the courtroom was full. Jennifer and Ethan attended, wanting closure. Judge Martinez reviewed Brennan's lack of remorse and long-hidden history of predation. Before sentencing, victims' families gave statements. Jennifer described Ethan's trauma, nightmares, panic attacks, fear of enclosed spaces, and the lasting damage to their lives. She reminded the court that many other families still had missing children. Susan Mitchell begged the judge for justice for Tyler and for the other 5 families still waiting for answers. More mothers spoke, each detailing the devastation Brennan caused. Brennan showed no emotion. Judge Martinez then addressed him directly, calling him intelligent, methodical, and entirely without conscience. Someone who turned vacation spots into hunting grounds and treated children like experiments. His crimes spanned years and destroyed lives. The judge prepared to pronounce the final sentence. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez delivered the sentence. Despite arguments from both sides, he ruled that Marcus Brennan would serve life in federal prison without parole for kidnapping, plus additional consecutive sentences for child endangerment and possession. He also recommended administrative segregation for Brennan's own safety due to the nature of his crimes. A wave of relief swept through the room. Jennifer held Ethan, whispering that it was finally over. Brennan, losing composure for the first time during the trial, erupted, claiming innocence, conspiracy, and fabricated evidence, until U.S. Marshals restrained and removed him. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer gave a brief statement thanking investigators and urging families facing similar trauma not to lose hope. Agent Wilson added that the investigation was still active and that the FBI was working to locate Tyler Mitchell and other missing children connected to Brennan. In the weeks that followed, public attention faded, but Jennifer and Ethan focused on healing. Therapy sessions, support groups, and a return to routine helped Ethan slowly rebuild confidence. He went back to school, made friends, joined the soccer team, and began reclaiming his sense of safety. Jennifer changed jobs to better support her son and became an advocate for child safety on cruise ships. Her case prompted the Royal Empress Cruise Line to implement stricter security policies, background checks, and staff training focused on identifying predatory behavior. Meanwhile, Brennan was transferred to a high-security federal prison in New Mexico, kept in isolation for protection. He filed several appeals, all denied. He would live out the rest of his life behind bars. On the second anniversary of the kidnapping, Jennifer and Ethan visited a quiet Florida beach to reclaim something the ordeal had stolen: the joy of the ocean. As they played in the sand, Ethan told his mother he wasn't afraid anymore. Jennifer held him close, grateful that the worst was behind them. Justice had been served, and for the Caldwell family, healing had finally begun.